Y'all, thank you so much for joining me for this video. I'll warn you now, it might be a little longer than normal because, y'all, I'm about to get on my soapbox like I don't, like I haven't in other videos. But came across a mindset today that admittedly I haven't come across in the past 2 years. Um, actually, like 3, 4 years maybe. It's been since I've come across this mindset, but it's still out there, and it's so toxic. It just, whenever I hear someone who has that mindset, it just angers me to no end. And let me start by saying not all churches subscribe to this mindset. In fact, in my experience, over the past 5 or 6 years alone, the majority of the churches I've encountered don't subscribe to this mindset. But y'all, there's still some out there. And I'm going to get to the mindset in a minute. I just got to preface this. And so when I encounter this mindset, it starts steam coming out of my ears. Because as far as I'm concerned, it is like way up there in the top 5 of most toxic mindsets. So let me give you a little backstory first. For starters, way back, and I've shared this in other videos, way back, I would say, gosh, 15, 16 years ago now. Actually, yeah, roughly, give or take, at least 15 years ago. I came across this toxic mindset. Well, no, actually, if I really think about it, I've come across this toxic mindset 25 years ago. And this mindset is what kept me in an abusive relationship way longer than I should have been. I've shared this in other videos that at best, I should have left my abusive ex-husband 13 years before I did actually leave him. Back in May of 2007, I was gone. I called the police on him because he was abusive to me. He hit my head so hard that he literally made my ears ring for 30 seconds. A good 30 seconds, if not longer. And I should have stayed gone then. But I had already been infiltrated with this toxic mindset that I will get to. Just please bear with me. And this toxic mindset had already infiltrated my brain and my heart, and it made me make the decision to take him back when I never should have. I should have put my kids before him, before the marriage. Because, yes, the marriage comes first, as the kids suffer when the marriage suffers. However, the kids never should be put, the marriage should never be put at the expense of the kids. And at that point, that's what I did because of this mindset. Do I blame the people that had this mindset? No. Ultimately, it was my decision. My crappy decision to get me, that made me make that, can't talk. It was my crappy decision that made me choose the marriage over my kids. Ultimately, it was my decision. I take full responsibility for that. However, this toxic, beyond toxic mindset is what influenced that decision. And this mindset dates back, like I said, from at least 25 years ago, when I came across this mindset. And you would think I would have known better, because I had a mother who was brave enough to leave my abusive father back in the 70s, when that was not done, especially in amongst professing Christian circles. Back in it was mid 70s when my mother left my father. I was 11, so that was in 75, and that took a lot of bravery, because that's just not something you would do, and there was no help for single mothers like there is today. And in spite of that, this, seeing my mother having the guts to leave, and having the guts to be a single mother at a time when that was not the thing to do. Even seeing that, this toxic mindset infiltrated my mind, and ultimately I made the poorest decision that I could have made back in 07. And this toxic decision, this toxic mindset, in a nutshell, staying married when you should be divorced. Now, I'm not talking about if you just don't love your spouse anymore, or it's just not there, or things that can be worked on and fixed. I'm not talking about that. Let me give you a little backstory. As I said, this mindset started infiltrating my mind back 25 years ago. Now again, ultimately I made the decision. It influenced me, but ultimately I could have chosen differently. Why I let it infiltrate me, only God knows. But 27 years ago, somewhere around there, my ex and I had belonged to what I realize now is a cult. We realized it after a couple of years of going. And I won't say the name simply because I'm not going to give it notoriety. But we belong to a cult that had this mindset. And I was wanting to follow God and do what God wanted me to do. And this mindset was, in the case of women, you love your wife. Women, you love your husband. You serve him. And you be good to him. And then one day he'll come to the Lord. That is the most toxic mindset that can ever infiltrate the Christendom. Because let me tell you, that is not biblical. Yes, it says in the Bible God hates divorce, and he does. He hates the need for it. That he despises the need for divorce. But let me let you in on something. He also despises abuse. When one spouse abuses another, physically, emotionally, or both, that's a deal breaker. I realize that now. But 25, 27 years ago, I didn't. And that mindset infiltrated my mind. And it was why I stayed for as long as I did. Well, part of why. Then, back in, I want to say, 2006, we started going to a church that, on the surface, was very biblical. But there were things going on in that church that would make your hair stand on end. And that's where I started getting inundated. I mean, immersed in the mindset of you stay with your abusive spouse. In this case, abusive husband. Let me further go into further detail. At that point, my ex was starting to get physical. Even more physical. Because he was physical before we moved up here. And then it stopped for a while, and then he started getting physical again. And looking back, I can see he was emotionally abusive, something fierce. And I didn't know where to turn. And then a lady at church gave me a book to read. She bought the book for me and a couple of other ladies in our circle for us all to read, so we could all be on the same page on things and know where to stand. Okay. I read the book. It was the most toxic book one could ever read. It was, I forgot the name of it, and I will not mention the name because, again, I'm not going to advertise the book. The book was, in a nutshell, one of the things it talked about was how to be a good wife, a servant wife, a helpmeet to your husband. And I was reading it. Then it talked about how you should stay in an abusive relationship, love that husband, serve him, be submissive to him, and he'll come to Christ. I think back now and think, how could I have been so stupid? But I was wanting to do right by God. And I didn't know enough about God to know that this is not what God expects. No, I could have a whole video, a whole 1 hour video on what it means to truly fight for a marriage, because even though godliest of marriages have tough times, this is a broken world. It's gonna happen. But you don't stay in an abusive relationship. And this mindset, I mean, this particular so-called church that where I read that book, that started getting me a thinking. I started doing things, it said dress up for him, always look nice for him. And it's like, well, there's some validity to that, kind of, sort of, because I was thinking, well, I had 3 kids, life happens, I've let myself go, I used to try to look good for him, I'm not now, so I started doing things to try to look nice for him. Well, that only backfired because he was an abusive jerk and criticized everything I wore, and right down to my hair. So, that only backfired when I started to try to take care of myself and do extra things to turn his head again. I was met with, yeah, I see you trying to take care of yourself. Who do you have on the side? Yeah, he was accusing me of an affair. And that was one of the few times I stuck up for myself with him, because I'm like, let me ask you a question. When do I have time? You can pretty much account for where I am. I'm either work, or I'm home, or I'm taking the kids somewhere. So, when do I have time? But, that's what I was met with. But I digress. But I kept on because I was reading things like this book. And this book was not the only time I came across this mindset, this toxic garbage, in this same so-called church. There was a couple that did a marriage conference one particular time. This couple had a history of domestic violence, and they went through their testimony, went through divorce. He became miraculously saved. God worked on both of their hearts. She became saved, and they eventually got back together. And it's like, okay, well, I'm thinking, here I am, wanting to do right by God, getting the influence of this toxic book which I wish I could burn all of this particular book that's in existence. I'm not one for book burnings at all, so don't go saying I am. But this book I'd love to just erase out of existence. Um, and then this couple comes, and I'm like, okay, if God can do that, then I need to stay. And so I'm trying to do all the work. First of all, I'm believing all the lies that my ex is telling me, how horrible of a wife I am, how I'm a slob, I'm this, I'm that, I'm every horrible thing you could think of. Plus, he made up things. So I'm believing all of those lies because I'm hearing them every single day. And then I get things like this book and this couple that are bringing about this toxic mindset. And then and then come 07, when I had to call the police on him because of severe abuse. I mean, y'all, he hit me on my head so hard that it made my ears ring for a good 30 seconds, if not longer. It seemed way longer than 30 seconds, but looking back at it, it was about that. And at that point, I was, thinking, okay, we're done. But that book kept running through my brain. What about this? If we get counseling and work through it, things can change. And then all glory to God, the marriage will be saved. Side note, can something like that happen? Absolutely. Where the abuser becomes saved and realizes how horrible he was, or she was, and change their ways, that can absolutely happen. Absolutely. However, it is not a reason to stay in an abusive relationship. But let me continue. So though nobody at this so-called church told me that I should stay, I had been infiltrated already by this horrible mindset, this horrible belief. And I'm thinking, oh, I want to take him back. We're going to go through counseling.
Your son
Well,
is attempting to reach
first
you
of
on
all,
your cellular device.
Counseling was a joke. Y'all, I'm so sorry. There's been interruptions with me trying to get a video up. Obviously, this is a hot topic that Satan's scared of. So, the counseling was a joke because it was the assistant pastor, and I use that term loosely, that was supposed to do the counseling between us. I had a protection order in place, got the judge to revamp the protection order to agree for us to be together for counseling, but only counseling. That's it. I think we went to maybe 2 actual sessions, and it didn't really cover much at all. The issues. I mean, I look back and I'm thinking, what did we even talk about? Because I don't remember that we even talked about the issues. I remember the assistant pastor's wife brought up, what brought you here? What brought you to this point? And I remember talking a little bit about it, but it was mainly my fault. And I had already endured such abuse, mental abuse from him, that I was starting to believe it was all my fault. And I was stupid. I just was in a hurry to want this marriage saved and say, hey, my marriage survived everything, and on and on. And I got the protection order vacated. Didn't even ask the kids how they felt about it. Nothing. And it was all because of this mindset that the marriage can be saved. That I'm to stay with the marriage, to fight for the marriage at all costs. And I realize now it was at the cost of my kids. And I regret that tremendously. I should have stayed gone. I should have stayed gone at that point, but I didn't. And yeah, it is my decision. I made that decision. I chose to not think things through. I chose to think on the surface and think, oh, this marriage can be saved. But it was that mindset that infiltrated me. So after, when he came back after the protection order was vacated, and he came back, the physical part stopped for the most part, because there was really no physical abuse after that, because he was like, oh wait, I can go to jail. But that's when the emotional and mental abuse stepped up, because there's no scars, no bruises for emotional mental abuse. Well, no outside bruises, no visible bruises. Trust me, I still have bruises to this day. Emotional, because of him. But, so, this mindset kept going and going and going. And he, of course, used that mindset to his advantage and made it worse, and till my two older kids were alienated from me, because I couldn't talk to them because of him, and they were mad at me for staying with him when he was abusive to them too, and they had every right to be mad at me. Every right. And then finally, and then I'm going church to church. We're looking for churches after that fiasco with that church was disbanding. The one where the assistant pastor was supposed to be counseling us. That church broke up because of major sin with the head pastor. And we started hopping from church to church, trying to find a true church. Y'all, we were finding three-ring circuses, not churches, but that's another story in and of itself. But through it all, that mindset was still on the back burner. And it didn't help that people only saw my ex because I was always being so quiet, and because if any attention was put on me over him, there was literally trouble to pay for later by him. Because though he always said he didn't want attention and would get mad at me for supposedly seeking attention. He was the one seeking attention. And so people never got to know me and find out who I was, that I wasn't like him. And because of him, I got shunned so many times for people. People didn't want to get to know me because of him, assuming that because he's like he is, that we're like-minded. And though I can understand the assumption, the immediate assumption, not one person wanted to get to know me. There was one church that we went to that saw people, that had people see him talking horribly to me. People overhearing and talked to the pastor about it at the time. And the pastor talked to us, and this pastor was so oblivious. He said that he told them, you know, Sister Penny may be more submissive than the average wife nowadays, the average wife in this church, but it's not like she would take any of this. Had he actually gotten to know me, he would have known that I was taking it because of that mindset that had infiltrated and got its tentacles wrapped around my brain and my heart. And not only did it cause damage to me, if it was just me it caused damage to do against, that's one thing. But it caused my kids to be damaged. Not damaged, hurt and abused. They're dealing with issues to this day because of this mindset that had taken its tentacles and wrapped it around my brain. A mindset that in this day and age I thought had pretty much disappeared. I had not dealt with this mindset for several years, especially since the going to the church that I attend now. These people were the first people that wanted to get to know me in spite of my ex. These people were the first ones that ever saw me for me, and not just as an extension of him. So when I came across this mindset today, I was furious. Steam, I'm sure, was coming out of my ears. The only reason I didn't go up to this person, and I'm about to explain, was because, for one, I knew that it wouldn't change this person's mind. And I knew that I wouldn't be listened to by others. And I knew it wouldn't be listened to by others because this was a church that we had gone to for 4 years before the one we're at now, or that I'm at now. And this particular church always kept me at a distance because of my ex. They didn't want to get to know me. I barely got a hello because this church had a conference going over the history of Baptists, where they got their start, and Baptist history in this country. And my pastor recommended it because he was going. And so I figured, okay, I'll go. And because it was about history, and I wanted to know a little bit more about the history of the denomination I belonged to. Well, in spite of the presentation being lackluster and stuff that I could have found out myself if I dug a little bit, and I know where to dig now. So, he wasn't saying anything different than what you can read in one particular book. In spite of that, there were some things that were interesting. Until towards the end, when he said this. He was talking about the testimony of his daughter, and said that if he's ever asked back to this church again, he wants to bring his daughter to talk about this testimony. His daughter had a friend at church who, as this guy put it, was treating the friend mean. I'm only assuming that meant abusive, the way he was talking. And this girl, the friend, was expecting, oh yeah, he's treating you mean, he's bad, leave him. And I'm thinking, oh no, he is not going there. And then he said, but my daughter told her, you go home, submit to your husband, pray for him, serve him, and God will take care of it. And then one afternoon, she's in the kitchen doing dishes. He comes up behind her, hugs her, wraps his arm around her, and says, I'm sorry. And the marriage was fixed in 2 weeks. And I'm thinking, he went there. I was furious. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Can God fix a marriage like that? Absolutely. There's nothing beyond God. But if this case is true, which admittedly I don't have a reason to believe it's not, it's only true because the man realized that he was wrong and that he needed God. Because without that, nothing's going to change. Because like in my case, my ex, according to him, he never did anything wrong. He claims now he did wrong, but I don't believe it because I know him. And he's told people what they wanted to hear before just to save his skin. But I digress. But absolutely God can do that. But what this individual was touting or promoting, wives, submit to your husbands. Oh, and he said, husbands, love your wives. And he quoted that scripture. Wives, love your husband. Husbands, love your wives like Christ loves the church. Oh yeah, he said that. But ultimately, that mindset it gets me hot. That mindset puts everything on the woman. The woman is supposed to love her husband. The woman is supposed to submit to him. Let me explain to you about biblical submissiveness. It doesn't mean like it says. It doesn't mean like people have twisted it. Any situation, there's got to be a leader. There can't be two chiefs. And God designed for the husband to lead, not lord over. It even says that in the Bible. To lead the marriage. There is a difference between leading and lording over. And in mindsets, like I witnessed today, that evidently still exists, is dangerous. And it puts all the responsibility on the woman. Now, that's not saying men aren't abused. Men are abused. That does happen. But that's a whole other story. I'm just talking about in this case. In this mindset. And men are told toxic things too. Men are told, men are quoted the story in the Bible where that prophet, I can't think of his name to save my life right now, took a prostitute and married her, and God told him to go back and get her when she left to go be a prostitute again. There's a reason God had him marry a prostitute. It was a symbolic thing. It was to show his love for the Israel. And I could go into a biblical story, a whole video about that alone. But people they take scripture and they twist it in knots to where it's so toxic. It's the cause of not only abusive relationships and abusive marriages staying when they should be apart, it causes kids to be hurt. It causes kids to be hurt and abused, because even if the abusive parent is not abusing the children, they're just abusing the spouse, the kids are still involved. They still witness it. Even if my kids hadn't been emotionally abused or abused in general by my ex, they were still abused by witnessing him abusing their mother. And I would have thought that this day and age, 2022, people would know better. And I'm not surprised, sadly, I'm not surprised that I heard this mindset in the church I went to. Like I said, it was a former church. I'm grateful, and I talked to my pastor about this, and he goes, well, sister, please know that majority of us don't subscribe to that nowadays. And I know, pastor, I know the church I go to doesn't. But I'm not surprised that this, and you see, I knew this is why God had us move. I knew it today, because I would not have gotten the support from this other church that I would have gotten, that I have gotten from this church. Because when I went over there, I got basically nothing. One of the ladies I sat next to, I came in a little late, and so I just kind of quietly sat down in the back. She didn't even want to tell me hello. She only did because I was sitting right next to her, so she felt like she had to. Had I not sat next to her, she probably wouldn't have said a word to me. And there were others like that too. Very similar. There was just one that expressed gratitude that I was there, and gratitude that they got to see me, whatever. Just one. All because of my ex. They didn't take the chance to get to know me. They just saw my ex. And I understand not wanting to get to know me too much because of my ex. Because heaven only knows if they'd have tried to forge a relationship with me, what he'd have done. Because, yeah. But none of them tried to see beyond what my ex was. Because of this toxic mindset. Because of the garbage that wives submit to your husbands brings upon. And husbands love your wives like this prophet whose name I can't think of took that prostitute and loved that prostitute. Seriously? In 2022, that attitude is there? That is so toxic. People take scripture and twist it in knots and make it even more toxic than the relationship that person is going through. Because it was all of this mindset that kept me in a relationship 13 years longer than I should have been, at least 13 years. It's because of that my kids are dealing with issues today. Because of that mindset. Now, like I've said several times throughout this video, ultimately, I made the decision. And I regret it to this day. But that decision, that mindset is what influenced that decision. And it is partially to blame. A major reason, major thing to blame. So don't ever believe that attitude or that mindset that you should stay with a marriage that's abusive because God can fix it. Oh yeah, God can fix it. No doubt. I know that with 1,000% certainty. God can fix any marriage, no matter how horrible. But both people have to realize the changes they need to make. The abuser, whoever that may be, has to realize that they're wrong. That they're the ones that need to change. They need to submit themselves to Christ and say, please change me. I am a horrible person. And when they don't realize that, or they don't admit that, there's no help that can be given. There's no help until the day that they realize that they need to change. So don't go thinking you can fix your abuser, because there is no force on this earth that can fix anyone. I promise you. I could not fix my ex. Just like he couldn't fix me. Because, he tried. And there were things I needed to change. I look back and I see there were things I needed to change. But ultimately it had to be God to change him in me. I couldn't change him on my own. And ultimately, I can't change him. He has to be willing to change. And then God will change him. Yeah, this has been a heated video. And hopefully, if you're all the way to the end of this one, thank you. As always, please share and subscribe. Y'all have a wonderful week. Stay safe. See you next time.